Chers amis, chers lecteurs de Carmin, bonjour. Je suis extrêmement heureux de vous présenter l'entretien qui va suivre. C'est l'entretien avec un auteur majeur du XXe siècle. Il s'agit de Warren Farrell, docteur de sciences politiques, et qui est l'auteur de trois livres que nous allons faire chez Carmin. Tout d'abord, cette année, au mois de septembre-octobre, paraîtra Le mythe du pouvoir masculin, qui est un livre fondamental des mouvements dits masculinistes. Je dis bien dit masculiniste parce que Warren Farrell, vous allez le voir, est un monsieur extraordinaire, d'une extrême douceur et d'une extrême intelligence. Et il a un parcours étonnant. Il va bientôt avoir dans un mois 83 ans. Donc il a parcouru le siècle. Il a connu le féminisme américain de l'intérieur. Alors pas le féminisme extrémiste, marxiste, autodestructeur et destructeur, mais un féminisme libéral, celui qui était structuré autour de Betty Friedan. Et il était un des rares hommes à faire partie du comité directeur de l'association féministe qui s'appelait Now, National Organization for Women, une organisation féministe de première importance aux États-Unis, avant de s'apercevoir que les féministes ne cherchaient pas l'égalité, mais en fait le pouvoir et la suprématie, ce qui l'a amené à revoir ses thèses et ses idées, et ayant un parcours de chercheur scientifique qui était bien sûr focalisé sur les données, sur les enquêtes empiriques, avant d'arriver à des conclusions, il a repris ses enquêtes et il est allé voir donc l'envers du décor, et cela a donné un livre extrêmement important qui s'appelle Le mythe du pouvoir masculin. Euh, le sous-titre, c'est Comment l'homme est le sexe jetable, comment les hommes sont le sexe jetable. Et donc, nous sommes très heureux de vous dire que nous avons acheté les droits de ce livre, et pas seulement. Le livre qui va suivre l'année prochaine de Farrell sera Roommate to Soulmate, et puis un dernier livre très important, The Boys Crisis, la crise des garçons, un livre qu'il a co-signé avec John Gray, l'auteur du fameux best-seller Les hommes viennent de Mars, les femmes viennent de Vénus.
This book and your new book in the boy crisis, and I would certainly recommend people who are interested in this sort of thing to go out and pick it up. It's full of facts and it's concentrating on something that's of crucial importance.
Mais c'est un livre un peu moins axé sur la vie de couple que sur les problèmes que connaissent les hommes, les jeunes hommes, les garçons dans le monde contemporain. C'est un livre extrêmement important sur la condition masculine, un sujet dont on ne parle jamais. Et donc nous sommes très fiers chez Carmin de vous annoncer que cette année, donc, nous allons publier dans le cadre du cycle L'héroïsme et ses coups, ce livre de Warren Farrell, ce livre fondateur, Le mythe du pouvoir masculin, et que donc l'an prochain, nous publierons les deux autres. Voilà, donc sans plus attendre, je vais donner la parole à Monsieur Farrell, avec qui nous avons eu, Mos Maïroum et moi-même, un entretien de plus d'une heure. Et voilà, nous sommes très heureux de vous partager tout cela. Merci encore pour votre soutien. Il est essentiel parce que sans votre soutien direct, on ne pourrait pas faire ces livres. Cela coûterait véritablement trop cher de passer par le circuit des libraires classiques, même si bien sûr nos livres sont disponibles en librairie. Sans les campagnes de pré-vente, cela serait impossible. Merci encore, et n'oubliez pas que vous avez jusqu'au 7 juin pour participer donc au cycle L'héroïsme et ses coups, dont fait partie le livre de Farrell dont on va parler dans l'heure qui suit. Bonne écoute et à très bientôt. Good afternoon. So, dear listeners, we are so happy to introduce you Dr. Farrell, the author of our book, the author of the next book we will send you, The Myth of Male Power, one of the 4 books we are pre-selling on this cycle about heroism. Dr. Farrell, we are so happy to have to have this discussion with you today. You are a hero of the free speech, of the free thought. You are really one of those figures who inspired us to do what we are doing today at Karma. Yes, we are so glad to have this conversation with you because also it's the 5th anniversary of this small publishing book, and your book will cross the threshold of 10 books published by Karma in So, Dr. Farrell, you have been born during the Second World War, and you have a lot of things to tell us about feminism, masculinism, male issues. First of all, okay, I want to reassure our audience, you are from a scientific background, no? So you studied political science in the 60s. So can you tell us a little bit about your background education, how and what events in your life brought you to this career?
Yes, my PhD is in political science from New York University. And when I was attending New York University, the feminist movement surfaced, and I took an interest in it and changed my doctoral dissertation to a very scientific dissertation on measuring how much attitudes and behaviors could change when exposed to feminist literature. And then I also created some men's groups and saw how much attitudes and behaviors changed or didn't change when people joined men's groups. One of those people who joined one of the men's groups whose life was changed very significantly was a fellow named John Lennon, who I didn't even know he had joined the group. He joined right after I formed it and taught the group how to sort of run itself. But it led him to taking off 5 years to raise his son so that he could, because he had missed the experience of raising his son when he was his first son. And he felt very disappointed about that. So anyway, I deeply got involved in the political science of feminism, and then joined the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City, and was I guess became the only man ever elected 3 times to the board of NOW in New York City, and then started speaking all around the world on feminist issues and the importance of feminism. And it was actually one time when I was in Japan when a woman came up to a female teacher, came up to me after one of my speaking engagements and said to me, really fascinated, by what you said about women and feminism, but in my personal class, the boys are having more problems than the girls. And then I heard the same thing about this from when I was speaking in Australia and then Canada. And then my sister mentioned that, when she was a teacher, my sister, and she said when some of the boys in her class, when their parents got divorced, they started doing much worse than they had been before. And I started looking into what was happening there. And usually it meant that the boys did not, the father had left the home and not been allowed to be equally involved with the children. And the boys felt sort of lost and they didn't have any postponed gratification. They started doing very poorly in school. And so all of this came together to be part of my early sort of involvement with feminism. And I was, very strong supporter, and I still am a very strong supporter of any efforts to empower women have my 100% support. But unfortunately, feminism went from I am woman, I am strong, to I am woman, I've been wronged, and men have wronged me, and I am a victim. And I don't think I think victim power can be very effective because when you blame men, people are fine about your blaming men, and it makes you seem it gives you more political power, but it doesn't give you more respect, and it doesn't empower you as a woman. And for women to be truly empowered, it's not good to rely on victim power. It's good to rely on your own power and working with men rather than against men.
Back in the 60s and 70s, if I recall, it was the second wave feminism, and it was mostly centered around issues like abortion rights, possibly everything related to couples and power dynamic inside the couples and intimacy. How did it go from there to switching to issues about power dynamics in general, with the idea that men wronged women for the last century or so?
Well, there were two parts of the feminist movement, even right from the very beginning in the United States. One was the Betty Friedan's feminine mystique, which was sort of catapulted second wave feminism in the United States and then ultimately around the world. And she and I agreed almost, word for word. She was, I think the best way to understand Betty Friedan was by her second book in 1981 called The Second Stage. And Betty Friedan made it very clear that that women's roles were restricted, but that men's roles were also restricted and confined, and that the feminist movement would not be really the optimal movement if we didn't have a second stage of the feminist movement, which was freeing men from their restrictive roles. So that was Betty Friedan on the one hand, and then on the other hand was Gloria Steinem, and Gloria was very much big into the patriarchy, saying the patriarchy controls the world and controls women, and is particularly tries to control female reproduction by not allowing abortions and things like that. And so and the patriarchy was a system which was designed to benefit men at the expense of women. And that was very different than my perspective and very different than Betty Friedan's perspective. However, Gloria Steinem's perspective was the one that was very much more Marxist in orientation, and Marxism was very anti-family. It believed that the family was an instrument of the patriarchy designed to oppress women and to benefit men. And so I didn't see it that way at all. I saw that historically speaking, the issue was not patriarchy. The issue was, if you'd like to call it, survival-archy, meaning that what controlled both sexes historically was both sexes had obligations and responsibilities and roles that they played in order to survive. I remember on a more personal level, when I first wrote, when I was writing a book in high school, and my father sort of saw that the author inside of me, and he said, Warren, it's really nice that you're sort of a good writer, but only about 1 out of 100 authors even get published, and if you can't find a publisher, you'll never find a wife. And because
basically it doesn't pay the bills.
It doesn't pay the bills, exactly. It's like really nice to be an artist or writer or an actor, or but that doesn't pay the bills. And if you can't pay the bills, you'll never be able to support a family, and no woman will be interested in you. And so that was sort of the beginning of when I began to learn that. And when it came to things like rights, my father would say, don't use the word rights. Nobody has rights. Everybody has, when you grow up, you have two things. You have responsibilities and you have obligations, and you don't have rights. Rights are for children, rights are child talk. And so what I started to realize was that historically speaking, neither sex had rights. Both sexes had responsibilities and obligations. And women had the responsibilities of risking their life, bearing children, and spending their life raising children. Men risked their life in war and risked their life in the hazardous jobs, and they spent their life raising money. And so if you were a man who was sort of a nurturer, protector type of nurturer, caring type of man, was very feeling in your orientation, and you were really good with children, there was no opportunity for you people didn't say, oh, you're the type of man who's good with children, so you should have the right to spend your life raising children full-time, and a woman will be attracted to you because you're going to say that you're going to be a full-time dad. So women were not attracted to full-time dads, and men didn't expect women to enter into being CEOs or things like that. Both sexes had their roles, and those roles were restricted not just for women; they were restricted for men as well.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean that's we have jumped directly in the themes of the book we will be translating and publishing. I'm happy, but I wanted just to pause a moment to explain to our audience. Okay, so the National Organization for Women in the United States was a liberal organization. Okay, it was not a Marxist one, so it was fighting for equal rights and. Yeah, Betty Friedan, our listeners could, okay, if they don't know who she was, okay, in France, we have translated one book of her, the first one, like The Feminine Mystique, which is called in France, La Femme Mystifiée. And I think, yeah, definitely the second book has not been translated actually because yet. Maybe we'll do that one day, but it has never been translated. Her second book, the one we just spoke about, and it's very interesting for our audience to remember that I talked in the preface of last book we published, The Sexual Desire by Roger Scruton. In the preface, I told about this meeting between Friedan and de Beauvoir in 1975, a very famous meeting because Beauvoir was actually arguing with her Maoist mindset that basically women should be forbidden to stay at home and to raise children. And Beauvoir was basically advocating a destruction of any role of any kind in a very Chinese revolution way of thinking. And Friedan was kind of flabbergasted at that statement, and she came back to the US very, very shaken by that encounter. But it was, but still in France, this train of thought has become also the main train of thought. The destructive feminism has become the main feminism as well as you. So. Unfortunately, it's not Betty Friedan and not your moderate trend that has won the cultural war for the moment. So, yes, just to explain, the situation in France and to situate Betty Friedan and Dr. Farrell was part of the board. Okay, the board of Now, so National Organization for Women. So you were elected and you fought for the betterment of the women condition, but not for the feminist supremacism. Like at some point, you realized that it was not more about equality, but it was more about getting more power. No.
Yes, unfortunately, the Betty Friedan feminine mystique orientation was very much, sort of like free both sexes. She put the emphasis on women, but she was very open to men being freer in their roles as well. Nobody moved quite to the level of what I was saying is that there shouldn't be a women's movement or a men's movement. There should be a gender liberation movement. That the job is that we should be celebrating the fact that this movement, this possibility of freeing each other from everybody from their rigid roles, this was possible only in wealthier nations, only in the middle and upper middle class, because what was taken care of in wealthier nations in the middle and upper middle class was one thing: the need to survive. And to survive, it was helpful for both sexes to have rigid roles, because the only thing you were caring about was just living, being able to live. But as you were able to live, you started to up your expectations. You wanted freedom. And so what the misinterpretation of feminists was that the only sex that was prevented from being free was women. But in fact, neither sex was free. Women were restricted to the roles that I mentioned, and men were restricted to those roles. But nobody was saying that, and I was saying that. And Betty was sort of like slower on that part of it until she wrote the second stage. But nevertheless, for me, it was trying to educate the world to the degree that I could reach it, that both sexes, that there were a lot of, so for example, when a major research center called the Pew, P-E-W Research Center, interviewed men who were full-time workers. And they asked men who worked full-time, if you had your choice, would you prefer to work full-time or be with your children full-time? And 49% of the men who were working full-time who had children said they would prefer to be full-time with their children. Well, that question until recently was never even asked of men. So it was not until about 8-9 years ago that that question was asked of men, that people opened up the door and said, by the way, would you consider yourself more happy to be that way? And so what nobody was asking, and so we were not asking men, what would you like to do? We were only asking women what you like to do, and then saying that men are preventing you from doing that if you wanted to be a CEO or break the glass ceiling. But at the same time, nobody was saying to men, what would you like to do? And to this day, now that many women are earning more than men in the United States and in many other industrialized countries, those women still have very little interest in marrying men who earn less than they do.
Yes.
And so, and that is one of the things that we need to confront, is the sexism of women, that when they do earn money, that what they really want from men is making sure that they earn as much or more. That is really the ultimate objectification of men.
It's because you coined a very nice expression to describe this way of considering men. You called them like success objects.
Yes.
Like symmetrical to like sexual objects for women. It was like success objects. So you always apply this symmetry, because the main exercise you actually, I think from the 60s till now you're doing in your workshops is like this gender reversal, no things. You always work with this. No,
male beauty contest.
Yes. No? I'll share a little bit about the men's beauty contest. So when I first started, when I was elected to the board of Now, I started in New York City. They got me to be speaking all around the world on feminist issues, and then sometimes I'd return to the same place a few years later, and I'd ask people. And people would say, "Oh, your speech was so great," and I'd say, "Well, what did you get from my speech? What changed in your life from my presentation?" And everybody started stumbling, and they couldn't tell me anything that had changed in their life as a result of my presentation most of the time. And so I said, it's not good enough to be complimenting me. If your life hasn't been improved as a result of my presentations, then why am I even speaking? And so I started then to create ways of getting men and women to walk a mile in each other's shoes, if you will. And so I said to my audiences, every woman is in a beauty contest every day of her life. If you are a man here listening to my presentation, I don't want you just to listen to my words. I'd like to invite you to participate in the beauty contest of everyday life that women participate in. So I'd invite all the men up to the stage and into the aisles, and I'd encourage the women to look over the men like from a sexual desire type of perspective, and to shout which men they like best, and if they like their rear or whatever, to say, "Oh, great rear," etc. And then so the women did this, and the men were competing to be one of the 6 finalists in the beauty contest of everyday life that women go through. And so at the end of the process, the men would say to me things like, this is really weird, because I was feeling like I was valued for nothing but my body, but yet I was up there trying to get attention for my body. So I was blaming women for paying attention to me for something that I was sort of helping to trying to compete to be the best of. And so I feel like this hypocrite, doing this. And the women started applauding and saying, yes, this is exactly the way we feel. On the one hand, we're trying to get attention for our bodies. On the other hand, we feel angry that the only thing we're looked at for is our bodies. And we're not asked about our values, our thoughts, our ideas, and we're not respected for that way. So then I said, okay, now the men have experienced the beauty contest of everyday life that the women go through. I want the women to experience the contest of everyday life that men go through, which is being a success object. So I had all of the women sit according to how much they either made or expected that they would be making 5 years from now if they were college students. And the ones that were expecting themselves like to be medical doctors or lawyers, they sat in the first rows. The ones that were expected to be artists or writers, they sat in the back rows. And then I had all the men look at the women and say, okay, now I'm going to ask you to make believe that your role is going to be to raise children full time. Do you want, you want those children to go to good schools and therefore live in good neighborhoods. So if you choose a woman from the first rows, the chances are fairly good she'll earn enough money to be able to have you be able to go to great schools and so on. If you choose a woman in the back rows, the chances are good that you will not be really able to give your children the best opportunities in life that are possible. So the women in the back rows were usually the more attractive women, but interestingly, so I had to really work hard to get the men to focus on the women in the front rows. And so I said, okay, women, your job is to ask out the guy you're most attracted to physically, which were usually the guys that had been the 6 finalists in the beauty contest. And so the women eventually, so I had to really work hard to get the women to come up and to ask out the men that they were most attracted to. But eventually they tried to do that. But the guys that had won the beauty contest, or the 6 finalists, usually had about 11 or 12 women competing to have them come out for them. And so at the end of the process, the women said, gee, this is incredible. What's happened to me is that I started to say to the guys, like, I really want you to come out to this restaurant with me this evening. I'll pick you up in my Porsche. And I don't have a Porsche. I can't afford the best restaurant. But I found myself sort of exaggerating what I could do and what I had because I didn't want to be rejected. And so a number of women said, well, that got me down to a certain extent, but I still had a couple of women competing with me. So I took a guy just by the arm and I pulled him away from the other women. And, like if a guy did that to me, I'd call him a jerk and I'd say this is sexual harassment. And here they would say, up until this point in my life, every time I've used the word jerk, that's referred to a man. But today, I was the jerk when I was playing the male role and trying to get the men to come out with me and exaggerating who I was, exaggerating what I had, exaggerating what I could pay. And then the nerve of me, I took him by the arm and pulled him physically away from the other women. If a man had done that to me, I really would have been angry. And yet I was doing that to a guy. And so it was like that. And so from those experiences, I have men come up to me today that I meet places that did this experience 30, 40 years ago, and still remember that experience of walking a mile in each other's moccasins. And so that began my life, where I eventually moved into training people in couples communication and teaching people how to hear personal criticism without becoming defensive. A book you'll be publishing called Role Mate to Soulmate that I have in a picture of on the back wall there, that got me to realizing how could I get both sexes to hear each other. And I eventually developed a way of being able to get both sexes to hear personal criticism from their partner without becoming defensive. And that is biologically unnatural to do. But that was the beginning of the process of my moving toward discovering how to do that.
No, okay.
When I read
just,
your book introduction because actually you made a forward to explain the book about 25 years after it was first published, and
Yes.
so it was kind of eye-opening because it was almost like getting the first recall you had in the early 90s about this era, and then 25 years later, and a lot of changes have happened in between. And to me, I'm actually a lot younger than you are. I'm in my early 30s, and to me, it
That's
almost
my
sounds
age. Oh, wait, maybe not.
it almost sounds like this era was too good to be true, to be honest. It seems like people were genuinely interested in feeling the perspective of the other gender and having this mutual understanding of how it was to be a man or a woman. Whereas now it seems that it's more like a battle, basically. It's a war, and there is a great divide, and people don't talk too much about the other's perspective. They just self-center in their own perspective, and they only follow on social media the accounts of men if they are men, or of women if they are women. How did we go from this era of mutual interest and curiosity to something more along the lines of worship, basically?
Well, I think, yes. And first of all, you're right. And second, it's deeply, deeply sad. And certainly, I think, part of it is, AI and the social media, and the fact that, that when you tap into a perspective, you're fed more of that perspective, and then you're fed even more of it. And before you know it, you think that's the only perspective. And so that's certainly been part of it. And that, I think, has fed the enormous gap between the left and the right. And in the United States, people like myself who were classic liberals, what we call classic liberals, will say things like, "I haven't left the left, but the left has left me." And some of the people on the far right feel the same type of way. And so we have people completely not listening to each other and hearing perspectives that were, that are only their perspectives. Now, in the couples communication workshops that I do, there's a mutual interest in both the man. Usually it's the man and the woman, but as you probably know, the divorce rate is much higher among gay women than it is among gay men, and it's much higher among gay women than it is among heterosexuals.
And same for violence, if I recall.
Yes, domestic violence, I think, is slightly higher among gay women than it is among heterosexuals. And most people don't know that among heterosexuals, men and women hit each other at every level of violence about equally, except young women now today who are dating in their 18 to 22 or 3-year-old category. Those young women are much more likely to hit men than the men are to hit women. But so that's a little bit of a different issue there. But in the couples communication workshops, the couples have an incentive to hear, to learn how to get along with the other sex, or with the same sex if they're gay. And so with that incentive, I can train people how to overcome the single biggest challenge. And the single biggest challenge is that, historically speaking, when somebody was criticized, it was a potential enemy. So it was functional for survival to kill the enemy before the enemy killed you, or at least not listen to the enemy, because you, at least to get up your defenses. So historically speaking, when you heard criticism, it was functional for survival to be defensive. But it's not functional for love to be defensive. What's functional for love is to be able to listen to criticism and associate criticism with an opportunity to be loved. But that requires an evolutionary shift. And the key part of that evolutionary shift is training people to alter the biologically natural mindset from defensiveness to an association of your partner's criticism with letting your partner know that no matter what she or he says, no matter how distorted it is, no matter how angry it is, that if you're able to really take that in as your partner's story, as the story of the person you love, that your partner will feel more loved by you and more secure with you, and therefore love you more. And so there's an enormous incentive to listen to your partner. Normally speaking, the only people that listened to you were God. And so people fell in love with their God because they felt God listened. Or today it's your AI bot who listens to you. So people fall in love with their AI bot. But the core, the common denominator is the enormous need that we have as human beings to be heard in a way that represents our way of speaking up. And if we can move in that direction, that will be more likely to save all human beings from destroying each other than any other single thing.
Right. It's very beautiful what you said, and I loved. Okay, now we are speaking about the book we will do next year, like the role mate and soulmate, and the stress you put in this book on discipline and art of love, and then more like, which actually for our listeners and readers links your work to the work of Roger Scruton we just published, and of course the idea that love is not something that occurs in a passive way, but has to be guided intelligently and willfully towards a mutual benefit. And it cannot happen just by mere chance, but it happens because we go contrary to our some primitive reflexes to hide, to counterattack, and to also to shield our nucleus of self-worth. Also, this is where your work is linked with Becker's work, with the two books we are publishing next month, hopefully about the denial of death and the birth and death of meaning, where the core concept of Becker is the self-worth. It's a very important self-esteem, and the defense of the self-esteem. It's paramount for any human being. So your work is definitely linked to the work of that great anthropologist, and you have the same insight. So that's why I'm so happy to bring together basically this those books and to show, on the same subjects, great minds speaking more or less alike, but in a different ways. But I want to go back to, because we keep on avoiding the myth of male power, and we're keeping avoiding the scandal. We're keeping avoiding the fact that basically you go against some concepts of the day, some very very prejudices of the day, that basically males had the power, have oppressed women since Neanderthal times, and basically they are victims forever, and we men have to pay, and so I have to make a confession. When I read your book, of course, it was after a very complicated, as you said, a relationship. So I had my aha moment when I read your book, and several others. But and yours, of course, was very important for me to understand my situation, because I was not a very good success object, and I thought a kind of relationship would work without me being a very good success object. I was quite conscious of that thing, but I thought I had found a woman who actually would not want a success object. And basically, okay, but then you also have some peer pressure, family pressure. Okay, I know it's not that also her decision. Sometimes also the others say like, but you are with that guy. You could have been with that guy and that guy, and this kind of thing. And well, anyway, it happened a long time ago, and it was a very, of course, something that made me what I am today. So I'm kind of happy it happened, but on the moment it hurts. Like the free, truth will set you free, but first it's gonna piss you off. It's gonna be like that. So it did the same for me. And yeah, one of the key concepts also for you that opened my eyes, and I think for our readers, this is why we wanted to do this book, is that basically you explain that men have been the disposable sex. Could you elaborate more about that, please, for our audience?
Yes, if you think about that, men have been trained to be what I call the disposable sex in two ways. One is that they're the ones that are drafted into war and lose their life in war. And in the United States and in France, we would be speaking German under Hitler type of orientation today if it wasn't for men being willing to die and to protect the country and to protect women and children and everybody that's growing up today. And so a couple of days ago, we had Memorial Day in the United States to memorialize the men who did this. But as a rule, we have that was the expectation that when a boy was, and so in order to, and so the other, I'll go first. The other part, the other is in hazardous jobs. That 93% of the hazardous jobs, the people in hazardous jobs are males. And so when people live in a home, just think about the home you're living in now. If you're listening to this, you're living in a home that was built by probably lumber, and the lumberjacks are one of the most likely to be killed professionals. And that lumberjack the lumberjacks are almost all males who cut down the timber to, and then that timber goes on to a long distance trucker who takes it across country to bring it to a construction site. That long distance trucking is also among the most hazardous jobs that exist. The 80,000 pound trucks cannot stop very easily, and they often have accidents, and people are often killed in them, especially when they have to drive at night in the fog and so on. So that lumber that your house is built with are built by people who are willing to risk their lives in order to earn some money to be able to build the home that you're living in right now. And then the construction workers in the United States who built that home in the United States, those construction workers, one dies every 8 hours in the workplace, and many others fall off ladders or fall off roofs and are injured and are not able to work again. And so these are people who are risking their lives. That's being part of the disposable sex. And if you are turning on your electricity in your home, or you're looking in your teeth, both the electricity and what's in your teeth is made by miners, and miners also die at very high rates, and they're also almost all men. And when you, in the old days when there was much more coal mining than there was, men trained themselves and their sons to go into coal mines. They usually died much sooner than they otherwise would have, from black lung disease, or they were firefighters. And in the United States, most of the firefighters are volunteers. And so
in France as well.
In France as well, yes. And so just think about that. A volunteer firefighter, when you're exposing yourself to the poisons from that we now know are likely to kill you much sooner. I had a housekeeper at one point in California, and her husband was a firefighter. At the age of 50, her husband died. And from the disease that he got from all the toxins from the fire, from fire, to sort of think of men being willing to die without even being paid for it. Why do we do that? Because we want to be admired. We want to be respected. And so we oftentimes look at men and women and say, well, women are into caring and into relationships. Men are into success and achievement. I really want everyone who's listening to really hear this. Men are not into success and achievement. They're into being loved, but we feel we can't be loved unless we're successful and unless we achieve. And our goal is to be loved, just like your goal is to be loved and respected. But we feel we can't get there unless we are taking these risks of the volunteer firefighter, of being willing to work in the mines, being willing to work as lumberjacks, or going to war. And so that creates an enormous amount of complexities in human beings that I'll be happy to elaborate on if you wish.
Just to bring maybe a couple of data points from France so that our audience doesn't think this is just an American issue, it has nothing to do with us. According to the official figures, about 1,300 people die during their shift at work. Out of them, about 95% are men in France. And this is, just to give a comparison point, about 10 times more than the amount of women that are killed by their husband. And we hear a lot about intimate violence, women being victims of violence in France. And we actually never hear about people being killed on their construction site or during their shift or whatever. So it's interesting to bring this amount to compare.
Yes, the data, very interestingly, pretty much is very similar all around the world. All around the world, the men do the hazardous jobs, and it's also, one of the really major damages that the feminist movement has done, that I do talk about in the Myth of Male Power, is the damage of framing domestic violence as largely male to female. There's more than 200 studies now that have been done looking at male to female and female to male domestic violence. All 200 of the studies, and to the credit of some feminists, when the first studies came out and showed that men and women hit each other about equally and punched each other about equally, and threw things at each other about equally, and severely damaged each other about equally, and killed each other about equally. When this data first came out, almost all the feminists said that no way. Men are far more violent toward women than the other way around. Now, a lot of those feminists, almost all those feminists, were women who replicated those studies, and every single one of them found out pretty much the same thing, that men and women hit each other about equally. The difference is that men don't report it, and men are more likely to be hit by a woman when they're asleep and with a pan or with an object. So the methods of hurting each other are different, but the levels of violence and the levels of people hurt are very much the same. Now, the importance of that piece of information is that once you know that both sexes hit each other and are hurt by the other one about equally, then the present method that we use, which is to have shelters for women, and then those shelters for women are supervised by feminists who tell the women never return to that abuser, because once an abuser, always an abuser. And so therefore, but most of the women do return to their partner who abused them because they also love that partner. But what could have replaced that, if we understood domestic violence was about equal, is teaching both sexes how to hear each other. Have you ever heard of anyone who felt listened to, who then slapped or hit the person who was listening to them? What we would have done much better as feminists would have been to teach each person in the relationship how to hear each other in a way that allowed them to express themselves fully, and that allowed the person who was speaking to be listened to, because people who are being listened to never slap, hit, or punch the person who is listening to them.
Yes,
And so what we did is created a major crime. We perpetuated domestic violence against both women and men by not understanding that it is a two-way street, and the solution is not preventing the couple from getting back together again. The solution is teaching that couple how to hear each other.
maybe because the point was not right. The point was not to get people to be happy, and the point of being an activist was to keep the problem going and not to solve it. If I think there's a problem with any kind of activism. No, it's if the problem is solved, they lose the risk of existence. So there's a kind of a perverted mechanism that keeps them going. I wanted to share with you, because we have translated at Karma one book by him. I just stumbled on a quote from Chesterton, and this quote, I mean, it fits perfectly in what you described. He said about this disposable sex, about men. The soldier in all ages has been regarded as a man in so very extraordinary a position that a particular glory surrounded him because he had to endure it. For a desperate need of the Commonwealth, he is a sort of a splendid slave. The nation which takes away from him the most ordinary human rights tries to give him, as some sort of compensation, the military legend. Take that away, and he would be strictly a slave.
Yeah, exactly. The very process of being a man was to be disposable was basically the same as being a slave. Absolutely. And even to this day, in much more subtle types of ways, many people, I'll say something like, we've heard expressions like, if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy, or happy wife, happy life. I remember once I was at a party, and I said, happy wife, happy life. And every guy there rolled his eyes and like, yes, that's for sure. And the women said, smart man. And it was not like the women disagreed with me. And I remember a couple of women said, you listen to him, sweetie. He's a relationship expert. It was like, and so, here we are talking about male dominance when we really know that in everyday life, if it's mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, and a happy wife, happy life. And we all want to be happy. And we recognize that. And, just there's so many things that happen that I talk about in the Myth of Male Power around these issues. One of which is like, every day when we're walking, when a man and woman are walking together on the street, if something were to happen that would threaten them, almost always the man would reach out and try to risk his life to protect the woman. Or if somebody is hurt on the street, it's almost everybody that risks their life to help somebody that's hurt is a man. But it's also important to understand that what happens as a result of men being disposable is very dangerous to men. So, for example, let's say you're training for war. You go to boot camp, which is the first level of training, and I don't know if you call it boot camp in France, but it's it's the first level of training, and you have somebody like a sergeant training you. And if the sergeant makes let's say you're Jewish, and the sergeant makes an anti-Semitic comment, and you say, excuse me, Sergeant, sir, but that was an anti-Semitic comment, and I'm Jewish. I was hurt by that. The sergeant, what would he do? He would laugh at you, tell you to do 20 push-ups. Why would he do that? Be so insensitive? Because your job in that early training is to be a cog in the war machine. And if the war machine has a squeaky wheel that's complaining, it doesn't work as well. Your job is to train yourself to die, to train yourself to be disposable. And so therefore you learn, and this is the key point here, you learn to keep your feelings to yourself because your feelings do not matter. No, it's worse than that. Your feelings do matter. If your feelings are expressed, you will lose the respect of other men, and and if your vulnerabilities are expressed, you will lose the respect of women. Many women say to men, I like a vulnerable man, but the moment they are vulnerable, really vulnerable, she tends to lose respect for them without even wanting to do that. But it's so deeply built into our biology. And so this idea of male privilege and male power is just really very erroneous. When I talk about male power, I say male power is about control over, power should be, the real power is about control over your life. When you learn to be a male, you don't learn to have control over your life. You learn to earn money that often somebody else spends while you die sooner. That's not control over your life. It's being a type of slave to the need to earn money. It's why in Japan, they have a game called karoshi. Karoshi is a Japanese word for death at the desk or death from overwork. And they have a game where the person who wins the game, he's the one that climbs up a corporate ladder or climbs up a religious ladder, becomes a pope, or wins at the pope game, the corporate game, the government game, becomes president or premier of the country. And when they get to the top of that ladder, they commit suicide, not in real life, but in the game. And what's the reason they commit suicide? Because there's an understanding from karoshi, which means death at the desk or death from overwork. Then the process of working to get to the top of a ladder, you usually give up your life. So you become a human doing, not a human being. And because you unbecome a human being, you basically have committed suicide to your real self.
Yeah, let's very much linked for our audience. Is very much linked to what you just said with the analysis of Becker analysis in both birth and death, meaning a denial of death, because actually the denial of death is actually what you described, is that the difference between a social role which is imposed upon a male and his individuality, which with all the potential he has basically to dissimulate or to repress in order just to fit in some kind of role that would bring him some sort of success. Okay, this is called, like in old days, it was called alienation. No, this is the alienation. The fact that you have to play a role which basically negates your individuality and your potentiality, and so this is one thing. I mean, Becker speaks a lot, very well about this. So that's why I think it's very complementary with the myth of male power. I mean, Becker gives the grammar of what you are just explaining more precisely about the gender roles. And what I loved about the book is basically you said that what's the eye opener was like you said, okay, women liberation was what? Speaking about Betty Friedan, okay, the program that has no name. It was that, okay, women were stuck in their role, and they felt without knowing what was going. Okay, it was not enough. Okay, I basically sum up what Betty Friedan said in the program that has no name was that it was okay. the role, the social role of being a housewife, of being a good loving partner to my husband is not enough for being fulfilled. And basically the liberation was the liberation from the role that the society imposed on women, the role of being a good wife, of being a good cook, of being a good mother. So this was the women's liberation. They could be, okay, whatever they wanted. But you said in symmetrically, there was no liberation for males from their role as success objects. But anyway, there was no thinking about symmetrically, okay, we liberate the women of their role. Okay, very well. What do we do about men? Can men be free, accepted in that sense, free in a sense? Okay, of course they are technically always free, but will they be accepted of not looking for becoming a success object in a sense?
Yes.
So that's am I summarizing well the core of your argument?
Yes, very, very important, and it's really important to understand that when men's role has a different trick to it. So we all want to be loved, but to be a hero and repress your feelings means you're basically unlovable, because people need to be able to hear your real feelings in order to really love you. Otherwise, they're just loving the money that you produce. And so for men, there's a tension between heroic intelligence and health intelligence. And so to be emotionally healthy, you have to be able to open up, be vulnerable, to be caring, and to be loving. But to be a hero, you have to not be any of those things. And so the way we got loved was by being people who are not very lovable. The way women got loved was by caring and loving, and which is a lot more liberating than getting loved by being somebody who's not lovable.
But okay, it crossed my mind this topic that's in the manosphere is very much discussed. What about hybristophilia? Hybristophilia? Like the
tendency for women to be attracted to male prisoners,
to male criminals. This kind of thing.
Yes.
Those facts, like all those, for instance, like the guy who committed a mass shooting in Norway, like 15 years ago, receives like 600, 700 love letters a year in prison from.
Yes.
And he's a monster, but he basically appeals to a certain category of women who, for the fact that he did those things, because otherwise he wouldn't have been known. But so how this fits in
there are a certain percentage of women. I remember when I was in high school, women, some women, very attractive women, would be attracted to the guy in a leather jacket who had the motorcycle and just was strong. Well, those are the sort of the primitive manifestations of strength and power. And women often a certain percentage of women fall in love with those versions of that, the destructive manifestations of power, as opposed to other women who fall in love with the men who are, they're going to be the future lawyer, the future doctor, and so on. They're not manifesting the power in that type of destructive way. And most women fall in love with more of those type of men. But there are a certain percentage of women, usually women who are not very educated, who are, and they have an attraction to just that bravery, that strength, that is directed and aimed in a very destructive way.
Well, if I can add, maybe I guess success can be defined in many ways depending on what your perspective on what's important in a man could be. And you could have success defined as fame, for instance, men who would have committed a mass murder or shooting or whatever would be at least famous in spite of being nice and gentle. You could define success as having money. Of course, we have discussed this extensively, or having physical strength. And so you have women being attracted to athletes or sportsmen, whatever. So I guess success object is a broad category that has a lot of subcategories inside.
Yes. And, if a man is a mass shooter and is willing to kill people and is in prison for it, the chances are fairly good he'd kill somebody to protect you. And so those are some of the primitive dimensions of that. Fortunately, most women are not attracted to the mass shooters, but there are a certain percentage that are.
Okay, so you think those are the primitive mechanism because I've heard your lectures. It's you are from a psychology point of view, because you tend to acknowledge like evolutionary psychology. Where do you situate yourself on among the psychology schools? Which one would you be part of?
I don't really, because my doctorate is not in psychology. I have not had to prison myself into one aspect of psychology. I just, I was able to figure out how to create this evolutionary shift from being able to be defensive with a partner to being able to really hear your partner and have your partner listen to, which takes a whole process that I talk about in the Role Mate to Soulmate book. But that's really, I've been able to do that in part because I haven't imprisoned myself to any type of psychology. I've just been able to say something is wrong here in people's inability to hear each other. Can I create a system that I call a caring and sharing project for being able to change that so that we can all hear each other? And of course, one of this with the myth of male power. When I met the woman who is now my wife some 32 years ago, that was about the time the myth of male power had just come out. And I asked her before we get together on our first date, would you read this book? Because if you really feel angry toward it and don't, we shouldn't get together. And I do ask, men when they say, I always get together with these women who hate men or they're very feminist in their orientation. I say, ask them to read The Myth of Male Power. Don't expect them to agree with everything, but see if they will listen to it. And then also read the book that they most want you to read. And then listen to what they would like you to read, and then listen to each other about have a dialogue and listen to each other about your perspective, each other's perspectives on this. And so it really is important before we get together to sort of moderate. My wife is an extremely attractive woman, and it would have been very easy for me to just not ask her to read that and to just jump into the relationship without and then worry about that later. But fortunately, she read it and was able to appreciate it, and she still remained attractive. So, reading that book didn't make her unattractive.
You are a hero, so it was in a way it was your trophy. That this book it is one of the most important books. I mean you are very modest, but it's for our audience we have to explain them that this book is really life-changing. I mean, for me, it was life-changing. I think you've heard this a lot for the past 40 years, but it's it is really because I stress the fact that Dr. Farrell goes to the data. It has this very progressive way of presenting the facts and not jumping to conclusions without presenting this data. So this is very different from a lot of either feminist or what's called nowadays masculinist literature, which is not which more like on a very belligerent type of writings, if you can say that. So that's why it's life-changing, because okay, this is facts. It's about okay, look at and also this very very civilized way. You have to also invite people to think from other perspectives, which is maybe not something everybody shares. We try, but I think I want to ask you, in my personal experience, when I read your books and I thought, what one experience I think in my life. I don't know if you could work with your method in a sense. Okay, I want to expose it to you because it's, I think, walking in the other sex's shoes, doesn't it have a physical limit? And I'm speaking about specifically the sexual drive. I mean, is it? I don't know. From my experience, what unleashed the most problems is in my life with a woman in particular was that she could not actually be in the shoes of a male from the point of view of the sexual drive.
Yes.
So, and she couldn't understand that sexual difference, basically. Even though she was very intelligent and stuff, but it was such a very deep blockage, a deep how we say a deep block. She could not view the sexual drive in a different way. In a sense, okay, put it very simply, that men has a bigger sexual drive than women. So basically that, and I think it's not, my case is not very special. I think it's a problem for a lot of men, and the source of a lot of problems with their partner, with female partner here.
And if I can add another one, I think cyclical mood changes in women is something quite difficult for men. I mean, I can grasp it intellectually, but I have no idea how it actually happens. And I believe it turns a lot of men completely insane because they hear something and maybe 3 days later, that same thing is completely flipped and they have to understand again, and they don't understand why something that was consensual 3 days ago suddenly is a bone of contention. And yeah, basically there is something there that I don't think men can really fully grasp.
Yes, absolutely. Let me deal with the second one first and the first one second. The key issue, first of all, both of you are, in my opinion, accurate in terms of your observations, and that's been my experience and the experience of almost everybody that I've worked with some exceptions. But the most important thing to do for a man with a woman's cyclical changes is to just plain hear her each time and not assume that you need to do something about what she is complaining about. And so the challenge for men is not knowing that the solution is listening, not repairing. We are trained to think that if a woman is bleeding, that we need immediately to put the Band-Aid on it, and that will solve the problem. But women don't want their problems solved by advice. Their problems get solved by them being able to express what's happening with them and not feeling that they're going to alienate somebody or somebody's going to rush to do something about it. And so the solution is just being there for her sharing that experience and not holding her accountable to a contradiction between that experience, and not solving the problem in actual putting the Band-Aid on type of ways. Now, when I talk to women about this, what I explain is that when a man does put the Band-Aid on, from his perspective, if you're bleeding, it is absolutely a betrayal of his love for you by not finding a Band-Aid to stop your bleeding. And he stops your bleeding because he loves you. But from the opposite perspective, what I'm saying to men is you have the real Band-Aid is the listening ear and just being there for her while she complains. And even if it completely contradicts a complaint she had a day ago, an hour ago, or a month ago. Now, on the sexuality part, I think it's really important for women to understand that men's greater desire for sex with you is part of what has made you so powerful with men and made men so vulnerable with you. Whenever you need something from somebody else and you have to beg them to supply it, that leads you as the person that needs it to have to pay a higher price in order to get it. It's a supply and demand issue. And when the woman is the supply and the man is the demand, we have to, if something's a great deal in demand, the price goes higher and higher and higher. And when your sexuality as a female is more in demand by us, we often feel we have to sort of keep our mouths shut or do something or be a hero or get a promotion at work. And then we get a promotion at work, we get more respect, we get one night of sex with that respect generated. And then we end up at work and coming home late, and the respect that we got one night works against us the next night. And so part of the reason we need to hear each other so effectively, hearing each other is such a solution, is to understand these differences, that the differences between our sexual desire and your sexual desire are part of our biology. That's part of what is, because we as men could have sex with 50 different women, and whereas women couldn't have sex, they had to take time to actually have the child from that sexuality in order for the culture to survive. And so those are all things that are just part of our biology, and just hearing each other and understanding that. But part of what creates the myth of male power, part of what creates male powerlessness, is our greater desire for your sexuality and our greater addiction to your beauty than you have to us. We want to see your breasts more than you want to see our penis. And so we spend billions, trillions of dollars a year trying to get your clothes off, and you put us in jail if we expose our penis. And that creates an enormous amount of power on your part that men do not have.
Yeah. Okay, definitely, but it's very rational what you're explaining. The problem is when it's irrational. That's the thing. It's like, because speaking about jealousy types, I don't know if you have in your practice met. I'm sure you have met the typical, no, not so typical. Thank God, but the jealous type who really can't stand the fact that she or he is not the unique object of desire, and even though she has a capacity for abstraction, but viscerally, it's not possible to accept the truth. The person can accept theoretically what you explained, but viscerally, she or he wants to be the only object of desire possible. So this is
the only object of desire is a different issue than the desired for sex as often as you desire sex. So there's a male-female gap that's quite considerable between men's desire for sex with their wives or their women friends, but neither sex is very comfortable. When a man has an affair, the woman is usually extremely upset, even if she's even if she deprives him of sex most of the time. And if he were to say rationally, listen, when I want sex, if you want it with me, you're my first choice. But if you're not open for that, let me go out and have sex with somebody else. The woman doesn't say, "Oh yeah, that sounds fair." She usually is quite both sexes tend to be quite jealous of their partner having an affair. Unless they have an openly polyamorous relationship, and then that's a different thing.
As someone who has explained couple dynamics throughout the last 40 to 50 years, have you noticed any recent change with the massive shift from traditional dating and courting scene to online dating and apps and basically something that feels a lot quicker from first meet to intercourse?
Yes, well, it's certainly, when I grew up, you basically couldn't have sex until you were married, and so there's a huge difference between that and the expectations today, but there's also a male-female gap. There's websites, there's sites like OnlyFans, where women can earn in excess of $1 million a year, not by having even being touched, but just taking their clothes off and teasing properly and so on. Pornography often addicts men to sex with visual objects, and pornography, being addicted to it, almost always reduces your ability to have sex with a real woman. So many things have changed. The algorithms in pornography are extremly powerful and addicting. So if you begin to respond more to one way of a man and a woman having sex, that algorithm is picked up and then you're fed that more and more. And before you know it, the person having a sex with a real human being who isn't responding in every single way exactly the way you want is no longer satisfying, and you can't get an erection and you can't have sex. And so these are all new phenomena that are being dealt with every day, and they certainly reflect the myth of male power, the fact that that women can make more than $1 million, some do, a year, by taking their clothes off and not even being touched. And that's not, and men cannot do that. And as I was mentioning before, when we expose our penises and our bodies, it's usually something we have to pay in order to do, as opposed to get paid for.
Okay, so
that all that is part of the myth of male power for sure. And I need to get off because I haven't had lunch.
No, we have run out of glucose. Definitely, run out of sugar here. Okay, no, it was so great a conversation. Thank you, Dr. Farr. We will hopefully we will have another conversation soon. I mean, we can schedule. Anyway, we will speak about your translation first for the myth of male power, and then next year. So for our audience, we will release the French translation of Roommate to Soulmate, hopefully together with the Boys Crisis. We haven't spoke about, but which is very important book you wrote with John Gray, the author of Now Men Are From Mars, Women From Venus, and you touched upon the problem of parenthood, of fatherhood, and all the problems of boys being raised without their fathers, and all the consequences on their well-being. And this is a very, very important book. We are so honored to have the right to translate into French. So I think we will have other occasions to discuss all those topics. So thank you very much. Do you have any message for the French readers you would like to say before closing this up?
Well, only that I have a great fondness for France and Paris. When I was 14 and 15, I worked as a cabin boy on the Seine River across from Les Bateaux Mouches. And so I really have an affinity for France, and I'm looking forward to coming back and promoting these books that you're publishing in person late next year.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Farrell, for your time.
Absolutely. It's been a total pleasure, really. I feel very honored to be with you.
Thank you very much.